So today I'm standing in my office with Tom McGehee. He is in a hotel in what city are you in today?
I'm in Nashville today.
Okay, Nashville, Tennessee. The reason for my conversation with Tom today is we were talking about the evil of open plan, or kind of the common story behind open plan is evil. But Tom has some very fresh and innovative look at how to make those environments effective. And it's different than what you've heard.
Mm.
So because of that, I want to provide a little bit of context and background of who Tom is. Let him give you a little bit of his journey to this point. And he's got a unique gifting and perspective on this kind of creative economy, this collaborative economy. And he's very well credentialed. So I met Tom probably 20 years ago when I was a brand new author for a group called Leadership Network. And in the same building on a different floor, there was this group that worked a lot with Leadership Network who was bringing in, this is in the early 2000s. So this is when collaboration was very fresh and new. And Tom led an organization called WildWorks. And WildWorks was this group that comes in and creates this highly facilitated, interactive event, captures it, scribes it, graphically records it, puts it in a book before you go, and you go home with this event as an artifact. I mean, it was so leading edge at the time. So that's when I met Tom. And then we both kind of went our separate ways. I've moved into this consulting space. Tom has written a few books. So Tom, give a little bit of background as to, that those days of the kinds of things you were doing and where you are today.
Well, Rex, it's great to be with you. I appreciate it. It was good to reconnect. And you said 20 years, and I'm like, yeah, it probably was. And it just doesn't seem right. Things are going faster than, I don't know, there's a relativity thing going on or something. But
well, you're younger and I'm younger, and that's why it feels shorter.
Gotta be. Yeah, we met. Right before we met, I was a partner with Ernst & Young, and I was working on global strategy. And at that time, E&Y on the consulting side, I had licensed a collaborative process, and they had these big fancy collaborative centers where we would bring some system in the room, some organization trying to do something across the whole organization. And the value proposition was that we would do months of work in days. And I fell in love with that process. I used it to guide a lot of global strategy with firms I was working with. Eventually became one of their lead facilitators in that way of working. And that's what introduced me to this whole area of collaboration, facilitated work, all those kind of things. A lot of the techniques you mentioned, the scribes, the digital capture, the environment itself, I really learned all that while at Ernst & Young. And then when I wanted to start my own organization, when I actually left and started the WildWorks group, I began looking at a lot of other large group interventions and how they were managed, everything from open space to future search to appreciative inquiry. And I tried to come up with my own method that I call results-based conversations that has become a way of guiding these kind of complex decision-making, getting groups to interact in a way that's really productive, all that kind of thing. So started the WildWorks group back in 2001, was working with Leadership Network, as you said, was working with a number of Fortune 100 companies. Did that for a number of years, disbanded the WildWorks group about 5 or 6 years ago to pursue some things on my own in the faith-based world for a while. And actually, when I was working in Europe with some groups over there, one of the things I say is I went to Europe and they actually had a bigger vision for me than I did. And the vision was they were asking, can I help train them how to do this collaborative work? And so as I came back and thought about it, I decided, I would restart a new organization, Wave Changer. And that would be to not only show up and do collaboration, facilitate or help do collaborative sessions for companies, but actually equip them to do it themselves. And so it's brought me back into the whole area of collaborative work, culture change to embody collaboration. What does it mean to be a collaborative leader? And then we wrote a book. A friend of mine and I put together a book a couple of months ago called "The 6 Realities That Impact Every Conversation." Because one of the things we've really tied to, and this kind of fits together, is collaboration and conversation is pretty synonymous, right? I mean, conversations, being able to have productive conversations are a real key to being able to collaborate. And everything in our world today is saying, making it harder and harder just to have conversations, let alone conversations that are productive. And so that's kind of what I'm focused on now, helping organizations create a conversational culture that's productive, to use their spaces, their processes, their people to, achieve more together.
So in my world too, the whole nature of collaboration is important in agile, words like agile and change, pivot, and the research we've done. I wrote a book called Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, where we saw environment as a key catalyst for change, but there's still this problem. And so I work in the world of architects and contractors and workplace strategists and corporate real estate executives. And it still comes back to the strategy to move towards this exchange of ideas. And yet the current, you read any kind of magazine, blog, podcast, and now open plan is really the enemy of creativity. Distraction in the workplace, noise, intrusiveness, and now questioning the entire premise. But you're asking even a deeper question that I think is fundamental. So for all those people who deal with environment as a key for the right kinds of conversations, what's that thing that we're missing in terms of making this work?
So a couple of thoughts on that specific to environment. When I train facilitators to use my method, my results-based conversation, one of the things I tell them is how important environment is. That what I say is, as a facilitator, you want to create a home field advantage, right? I mean, so for example, again, what I tell them is, like, if you have a conference table and people come in and one group sits on one side of the table, one group sits on the other side of the table, before you say a word, you're negotiating, right? The environment is fighting against you working collaborative. There's this big thing between you and the other people. You're on either side of it. You have to make a certain effort to move to a part of the room to get to a whiteboard. Any of those kind of things, it fights against the conversations you're trying to have. On the contrary, if you take a group of people, let's say 2 teams that are trying to work together, and you put them in an arc of chairs around the whiteboard, but before you say a word, the environment is screaming, somebody get up here and draw something, right? Somebody create an idea that we can talk about. And I'll come back to, if you remind me, I'll come back to this idea of drawing things, how important that is. But the environment, all that to say, the environment plays a huge impact on the work that's being done. I think the difficulty with the, quote, open space idea is probably twofold. One, often the spaces are very, more like living rooms, right? They're trying to be very comfortable. They have that kind of feel to them. And so it's a little, I think, confusing, to say, are we here to do work, or are we here to socialize? Right? It's like going into a Starbucks.
Right.
It really is. You go into a Starbucks, do I sit at the table to get work done, or do I sit in the softer kit chairs to kind of read a book or something? Well, in the office space, it's a little mixed there too. Am I supposed to be more relaxed and social, or is this supposed to be a different kind of work environment? So that's one level. The other thing that I think is critical is, just like environment is such a component of good facilitation and collaborative work, so is the process of collaborative work and conversation necessary to a good environment. So what I find is we have, you have an open space, but you don't have any process or foundation to have conversations even in this great space. You create even like a room of whiteboards or glass that you can write on, or a thing that, it's all built to help you, but you don't equip people with just a fundamental way to design their work so that when they bring these groups together, they can actually get more done.
Okay.
And you just expect that if you have a good place, they'll have a good conversation, and it's not that easy.
So I want to unpack that for a second, but it really fits with some of the things that we talk about, that every space has a voice, and it's telling you what we do here, not necessarily good or, clear or not clear, but it says, here's what we do, here's what's permitted, here's what's not permitted, here's who's important, here's what we value. So now when you have kind of, let's take a traditional open plan space, benching desks, office people, people sitting in these kind of open areas. You've got some maybe small collaborative rooms off to the side or something like that. What do you design in terms of the protocols or the practices or the behaviors or the expectations that help leverage or take advantage of that space that's not there today, that people don't get when they move into an office place?
Yeah, so right off the bat, there is a difference between having an open space where individual work is done and having a space where people come together to work collaboratively.
Okay.
Right. And so that's one thing. Just because you've opened it up, I mean, if what is being done in that open space is really individual work, then you're going to find that everybody is sitting in an open space. They all have on headphones. They're all trying to act as if it was their own space because they're all working on their own things. And so one is the space for really group work, collaboration, group think, design thinking, all of that, or is it just an open space for people to work individually? And so that's the first kind of bifurcation, I think. If it's a space where people are to work collaboratively, like you have maybe rolling whiteboards, or you have a seating area and you have plenty of whiteboards, you can roll into that seating area so you can get your ideas up and have a conversation and people can work on it. If it's that kind of thing, then the question is, how do you design that work they're doing? I was in a space, I don't know, a few months ago in the Dallas area, very successful, growing company, fairly new company, big open space. They prided themselves that, they're a flat organization. They don't have any doors on the offices, even to the executives, a lot of open space. And those things. And I saw a few groups working together, and I saw a few kind of meeting rooms, and a lot of people sitting on chairs, sitting on sofas, sitting on different things, again, with headphones on, doing individual work in a comfortable space. But I asked them, I said, so when they come together, when you bring them together to collaborate or try to work together on something, do you have anything that guides that? And they said, oh yeah, we have them all take this class on effective meetings. And I said, well, what does that entail? And it was like, well, you have to have an agenda and you have to keep time. And so, I mean, that is a traditional meeting framework for an open collaborative thing you're trying to do. It just doesn't add any value, right? I mean, what you need is to think about, how do I bring the people together, hear all the voices that are in that group, and how do I get their thinking out so that we can really do more together? And a space can really help you do that if you also have the process that takes you through, how to think about it in a simple way. To who do you want to have in the room? When do you want to have them there? How do you want to get things out? One thing I just want to comment, I keep talking about whiteboards and those kind of things. I'm a huge believer that we are losing our ability to have conversations in this country, if not in the world, right? I mean, it's just,
seems that
first
way.
off, oh man, first, I mean, I don't even want to talk about politics, right? Because it's just, one side or the other. You think about technology, the Twitterverse, et cetera, the only way you get heard is to scream something, right? You've got to yell at each other to get above the noise. So all this technology is pushing us toward isolation. So you now get together as a group, and we're even losing that ability. How do we have a conversation? One of the big things is, I believe we're having more and more difficulty separating ideas from individuals. Okay.
Unpack that.
Yeah. So if you come up with a really good idea and you just tell me about it, and I'm responding to you, and it's very hard to separate you from that idea. If you take a whiteboard or a flip chart or something and you draw that idea up there, suddenly you and I are having what I call a third party conversation. That's now you and I talking about the idea.
Right.
Just that little mechanic there frees people to have a better conversation, because it's something that's up, and we're both talking about that, not about each other. And in a day where conversations are harder and harder to open, and in a big open space like that, do you have places where you can create third-party conversations, where they can wheel in a whiteboard and they can say, I got an idea, let me put it up here, what do we think? And we're working on that. Those kinds of things, I think, can really lift the productivity in what is, rather a comfortable or open environment.
So, do you have an example of a company that has kind of done it very well, created the right environment, creates the right kind of protocols or practices? And what does that look like? How is it different than what you've seen other companies attempt?
Yeah, so I don't know if I have one, but I've seen bits and pieces all around, right? I
Okay.
mean, we're getting at a cultural issue. I mean, one of the things at Wave Changer, we've built out 3 offerings. We started by offering facilitator training. Then we were offering a way of working around results-based conversation, so you can lead your own team and you can be more productive. But then we had to create one around collaborative leadership, because what would happen is some team would get together, they'd have a really great idea, everybody would buy into it, everybody would say, let's do it, and it'd smack up against a non-collaborative leader who would shut the whole thing down.
Okay.
Right. So there is a cultural aspect of how much do you want to allow this collaboration to happen? How much, and to me, I define collaboration as doing more together than you can individually. So it's multiplicative. It's not additional.
Got it.
A lot of
Yep,
people
I
would
like that.
a lot of people would define collaboration as like really good teamwork. I think
Right.
it's more than that. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being able to create something that you know, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts type of.
That's right. I'm with an organization with their leadership next month, and they're having exactly this issue that everybody's doing really well in their own silo, but they're leaving so much money on the table, because if you add that up, it doesn't get to everything it could be, because it's just adding things together. It's not multiplying their capability.
Great.
Trying to work with them to get over that silo mentality. So a lot of this starts on an example. If you have a siloed mentality and you create an open space, your people aren't going to behave that way, because it's unlike all the way they've been taught to behave all along by your organization. Yeah. Now, it can be a great start in moving that way, but then leadership has to continually push that, no, this is how we work together. This is how we do things. Let me give you his historical example. It was like when Jack Welch took over GE years ago.
Right.
He created a thing called workout, right? And the workout was his sort of collaborative process to get, if there was somebody had a good idea or something, you had to get these people in the room and you had to do a workout on it for a couple of days to get all the group think to understand if it was a good idea or not. And he made everybody use that if so you went to him and tried to present an idea and you had not done a workout, he wouldn't accept it. So he forced it into the culture, right? This is a mechanic you've got to go through. And then going through that mechanic, you then begin to develop more of working together and doing things together. And it kind of weeded out those leaders who did not want to open themselves up to work together, because working together was the only thing the CEO would accept.
Yeah, interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the culture. So I had a client. It was a utility client. They built public water treatment facility. It was a public utility. Mm-hmm. And so their culture would be what I call a chain of custody culture. Mm-hmm. You had the engineers, you had the project manager, you had the estimators, project managers, all this kind of chain of custody type of thing handed off. They were in a very old facility, had high wall cubicles or private offices. And they just built a brand new, beautiful building, all open landscape. And I saw it and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. I'd love to work here. But they were having close to a revolt. So they asked me to come in to help them train the 100 managers they had as to how to go back and convince their people that this was better than what they had. And fortunately I got paid for the event, but but what I said is, so here's my problem. I said, how safe is it in your culture? And I had the CEO sitting there and the CFO, and there were just looks back and forth. I said, it's not that you're bad people because you do all kinds of great things and benefits, but you have a culture that really is protective of, this is my piece of work, and I can trace back. If there's a problem in the project, I know exactly where to trace it back to. Now you're asking all those people to go out in the open and for people to see what they do. And, you know, it's kind of like sending them out into the Serengeti where the lions are, and there's no place to hide.
Yeah.
And I said, so you need to spend as much time preparing for what this new environment is like, and what the new behaviors are like, and what the new rules of engagement are, as you are on the design and the plan. And it was an interesting, I think it was very eye-opening for them. They did go back to their suppliers and say, help us with the change management. They spent a lot more time doing kind of stakeholder input, but that whole thing that you're saying is the culture supporting of the environment is probably the biggest mistake I see.
No, it really is, because again, environment is such a big impact to how people work and what they're able to do and those kind of things. And it really reinforces what do you want to do. So if you've moved to an open space, the question is why? You know, was it just because you think that open spaces are the things to have? And if people have sofas, they're going to be happier than if they have, you know, desk chairs. Or is it that you want to create a culture that is different, that where conversations are be able to be had, that teams can form on their own rather than by rigid design? That people, if you're working on a set of ideas and somebody walks by, do they have the permission to stop and go, I know I'm not working on this, but I see what you're doing, and may I make a suggestion that you do X, Y, Z, and add to the conversation? Or are they told to mind their own business? This is what we're working on. You know, those are the kind of things you think about that environment can either can hopefully support, if that's what you want to happen.
So one of the things I'm hearing in that, in order to be able to do that, work has to be more visible or visual. So that third part, you know, that visualizing your work thing, or here's where we are in our timeline, almost like in integrated construction projects, they have what they call a co-location space or a big room where the whole schedule is visible and anybody can go up and look at the schedule. Anybody can go up and write down solutions or questions. So it's intentionally designed to be highly to visualize your work, which is a lean principle, is making work visible. But
there've been a lot of different ways of doing that. And one of the reasons I think this is important is I was exposed a year or so ago when I was in Europe to a model. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. I think it's like the Kinofin model. And what this model said is there are 4 types of problems. Okay, so there's sort of what I think he called a chaos problem, and that's where I know what the problem is. I don't know what the solution is, but I don't have time to think about it. I just have to do something.
Okay.
Then there's a simple problem, and in a simple problem, I know the problem and I know the solution. So now it's just about finding best practices. Then there's a complicated problem, and a complicated one, I know what the problem is, I know what the solution is, but I've never done it before, or it's complex. I need to get some help. I need somebody to walk me through it. But more and more today, and so if you're dealing with one of those other kind of problems, the need to get more input, the need to have people see it, the need to constantly revisit and iterate what you're doing, it's a little less because it's a little more straightforward, right?
Right.
But more and more today, I think problems organizations face fall into this bucket of complex problems.
Right.
And what he says is, in a complex problem, you're not sure what the problem is. You know, like our sales are down, or our employees are unmotivated, or our production just doesn't seem to be growing like we thought it would, or this, you know, something's wrong, but you don't know what it is. And what he says is the only way you're going to be able to solve a problem like that is by engaging the people who are involved in the work and giving them a way to work where you can identify patterns, and from the patterns you can help identify where the errors are, where the problem So that whole way of identifying
Hmm.
patterns is if you have people working and they're putting stuff out and you have other people see it, those patterns become visible. Whereas everybody's down on their computers or everybody's writing in their own notebooks, it's hard to see the pattern. So that's why that's so important. I think that when the work is complex and it's something like that, then it screams to need that kind of support to be able to get through it.
Well, that's what you were doing back in WildWorks. I remember you had these graphic scribes who I've hired one of your graphic scribes for my last 5 books, Michael
Yeah,
Lagaki. And
he's a great guy.
that's truly what's taking place. As we're talking, he is drawing, but he's also connecting the pieces. So it's something that happens visually that you can't do with linear, capturing notes or things like that. So I've experienced that power, but I first saw it when you guys were back at WildWorks doing it.
Well, and one of the things, that is a technique or an element of this, right? Having
Right.
somebody drawing or having the ability to draw is an environmental thing. I mean, we've set that up to do it. There with some of the things at Wave Changer now, I'm saying I believe that I think fits into this. The one thing I believe is that people support what they help create.
Right.
Okay. So if I want people to really own these things, I need to figure out, it doesn't mean everybody gets to do what's right in their own mind. It means like if I've set a direction, but I've let them figure out how to go do it, I'm going to create engagement and ownership at the same time we get results made. The second thing is I believe the answer's in the room, right? That most organizations hire really good people and they probably have the answer to your most pressing questions. They don't get a chance though to share that.
Right.
And again, an environment, an openness, that's all trying to say we want you to do it. But if we don't have a method to help us get that out, it's almost more frustrating, right? Because I feel like I should be able to share all these things, but nobody's asking me.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure with different kinds of people, the way they process, having that flexibility to either think out loud or to go back and be reflective and come back. So the facilitation to me also seems to be very crucial. And I don't know many managers that really have been trained or understand the role of facilitating conversation. So speak a little bit about that and whether, if it's day to day, you have to have it embedded in house. So how do
Right.
people develop that skill to help the introvert and the active person and do all those come together with that collective knowledge?
Yeah, so a couple of things on this. We just conducted a workshop yesterday around results-based conversations, and it's something new that I've developed that says instead of just being a methodology just for facilitation, how can a leader use this with his or her own team in doing just that? Working on an article now that's called "Leading by Asking Questions Instead of Giving Answers." Right? There's that part.
Right.
How does a leader, we think of a leader as somebody who has the answer and tells people what to do. What about a leader who asks the right questions so that people maybe even do more, can give their best to the solution? What does that look like? So that's part of that. One of the things I talk about that for years my methodology for doing these things was built off of principles rather than techniques. Okay, there are a lot of facilitation techniques like I don't know, you put dots on something, or like appreciative inquiry is a very much of an interview-based process, and you're going to always do that interview. I try to create a process built on principles rather than techniques, so you could apply it to all sorts of different things. And the principles that are knowledge, understanding, and decision action. Okay, and so what I say is that in any meeting or anytime you get to those 3 things, knowledge, understanding, decision, action, are what you get to balance. So if you go to a conference, you're going to get a whole lot of knowledge, just a little bit of understanding, and you're probably not going to really make any decisions from it, right? If you show up for the Monday morning staff meeting to plan things, you're probably going to make a whole lot of decisions with some understanding and probably just a little bit of knowledge. I mean, if we've got to figure out who's using the conference room on Tuesday and are we visiting the McPherson account on Wednesday, and you say, well, before we get to that, I have a 45-minute PowerPoint I want to take you through.
Right.
Everybody's going to be frustrated, right? So it's a different thing. In collaborative work, and this is, again, back to the spaces, in bringing people together, what I think is it should be about 20% knowledge, about 70% understanding, and about 10% decision action. The understanding piece is what a lot of people, a lot of organizations miss today. They devalue today. It's like, I told you what to do, you said you understood it, off you went, and it seems to be running until you start to actually do something, in which case you have to come back and clarify, wait a minute, I'm not quite sure now that I'm doing, well, you can work all that out in understanding. And again, having a space where people are able to ask questions, that you present the knowledge and say, okay, let's talk about what I just said and make sure you really understand what we're trying to do. You know, when we talk to collaborative leaders, we say understanding is not about clarity, it's about ownership. That's right. Great. So if I say, hey, do you understand what I mean is, will you take it now and run with it? Yeah. And if all you think is, oh yeah, I can recite it back to you, you know, it's a different thing. So again, if you're dealing with these kind of issues where understanding is important, then all these things of environment enable that to happen if you want it to.
Yeah, and that has huge implications in the world I work with large construction projects. Because the pressure is, you have all this knowledge in the room, you know, all these experts on structural and MEP and architecture. So you've got huge knowledge reservoir. I won't, because it doesn't necessarily get activated.
Yeah.
You've got very little time spent on fully understanding the implications and how all this works. It's pretty scripted and linear, with a huge push to putting out packages of execution, you know. And what's really needed is, consequently, 70% of construction projects come in late and over budget. And I think it's primarily because very early on, that understanding based and the interrelatedness of the work doesn't get worked out early. And then the handoffs aren't clean, and the collisions, and you've got competing incentives and all of that work against a good project. So huge implications. That's a big aha for me. Go ahead.
Well,
I've got a question.
Okay. I mean, along those same lines, you think about people that are working on something, and somebody who's the project manager, the team lead. And if he's used to being in a kind of a normal environment where he's at the head of the table and his team's around the table, and he tells them what needs to be done or what he thinks that, you know, the current state is, or whatever it is. And he says, do you have any questions? And there's silence for a while. And usually before they can finish processing, he starts speaking, or she starts speaking again. Right.
Right.
And so again, everything's working against the ability to have that openness. You know, if you were in more of an open space and people are in almost like a circle and you're around together and everybody, the environment says we're all equals in this discussion. And I'm able to put it out by showing it on a flip chart. And then I'm able to hold my tongue until somebody speaks and allow them to have a conversation about it. I'm going to get a much more robust dialogue that will lead to that understanding. Then, and in that case, the environment helps that to happen. Right? If I'm standing at the head of the table and I ask something and there's silence, I feel like it's on me to say something.
Right. That you feel that. Yeah. Right. You feel that.
Yeah. And it's not, even though I don't want to, I want them to speak. The environment's working against me. If we're all in kind of an open space and people are thinking, what I've got to then realize is I've been thinking about this, you know, all night for this meeting. It's brand new to them. I've just got to give them some time to process it and then be able to share. So
you've given me an idea. So the next time I'm with a group, we're going to clarify what we want as outcomes. And then I'm going to say, assuming the room is conducive, I'm going to say, okay, I'll be back in 3 hours when you've worked this out. And now you can tell me how we're going to do this. That's going to be my new business model here.
Nice.
I want to go back and revisit, because what's common now is one of the earlier scenarios that we talked about, which is the open desking model and everybody with their headsets on. So how should somebody planning that kind of environment think about it? Is it effective? I think the assumption is we want this environment because we want to encourage people to actually interact with people instead of just texting or sending emails. So if you can see somebody, the assumption is, which is not really borne out, that they will actually go talk to them. So let's talk about, because that's the more common kind of environment. And how would you help somebody think through when or how to do that environment? And if you have that environment, how to make it more effective?
Yeah, it's a great. I was having this conversation last week with this board of directors, and one of the guys on the board was talking about they implemented a couple of years ago what he called a bullpen, right? Kind of an open area for an investment company and for them to
Right.
work on and those kind of things. And you know, the balance there is kind of how much work is individual and how much is group, and how do you enable them to work when they need to by themselves and work with others when they need to. So it's not an easy trade-off. If you had kind of an open space with people at desks and you can see things and you can do that, then the thing you need to be able to do is continually almost go around and ask, hey, what are you working on and who could help you with this? Or it's almost like right when you take a break and you go to the coffee, you have to stop and ask somebody, can I help you with what you're working on? I mean, kind of thing. You almost have to build that ability that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength, because that's what gets at a lot of this. That you've got individual competitors that are supposed to share, but they're all individual competitors. They're just not going to do it.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there's a role in the organization for the weaver, the networker, the person who goes around and says, hey, Tom, what are you working on today? Oh, Joe is working on something similar, or he's working on a contract and could use your information. And maybe part of that is actually having a role of somebody who helps make those makes those contacts and connections and help people do that.
I was with an organization that's, I think, kind of a leading edge in organizational structure and philosophy, a consulting company in Dallas called Paravita Solutions. And they have a lot of millennials. They're a very young company, and they've really got some innovative ways they work and things they do, and the way they're structured. But one of the things they talk about in a meeting, they have a meeting protocol, and when a meeting of a group starts, the first thing they do is go around the room and let everybody very candidly be able to say, you know what, I'm only about 75% present because I was up with my baby all night last night. Okay, and the next person to say, well, I'm about 100% present because my head's on the line for this and I want to get this done. And kind of go around and let everybody know where they are before you start the meeting. So if I'm grumpy and my arms are crossed, it's not that I'm upset, but I just, had a bad night last night or whatever it was. And so it level sets the group before they begin the work. You could do something like that in an open space. Imagine if you just took 15 minutes and before everybody jumped behind their desk, you just kind of went around and said, what are you working on today? What do you need help with? Are you at a point where you really need to talk to somebody, or are you at a point you need to be left alone?
Yeah. So,
and just had everybody say that, then you'd kind of know, okay, well then I'll come check with you about 1 o'clock today. So yeah, I would love that. That would be great. And then we kind of schedule it versus just guessing. I wonder if he needs my help. I don't want to bother him. I don't want to be rude. Instead of guessing to that, you kind of level set everybody and off to work they go.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds like and there's a company called Next Jump in New York that has very similar kinds of behavioral practices and early level setting. So any final, if somebody is beginning to think about new environment or improve collaboration in their workplace, what's kind of the priority? Where do you start with this, and what are some next steps?
I would be one that, it's always easy to if the pendulum swings one way, the tendency is always to swing all the way back the other way, right?
And I think that's where we're at, is the pendulum has swung.
Yeah.
And now it's kind of, if you're doing open plan, you're evil. That goes back to that. There's no conversation in the middle. It's either you're bad or good. So
that's right.
Now it's evil. So help somebody through this.
So I begin by saying it's not evil, right? But is it serving the purpose you want it to? And instead of focusing on the environment will change my people. Think about how is it I want my people to behave, and create an environment that enhances that.
It's great.
You know, if you opened it up because you really want them working together more, then invest some time in teaching them how to work together more and use the environment. If the environment, if in fact your business is more about, no, they just need to be doing their own work, then it would change. But think about how you need people to work together, whether it's complicated, whether it's complex, where is it, how you need them to work together, and then think, what would be an environment that would create a home field advantage for those people to do that, rather than jump into one conclusion or another and without thinking about how the people really do the work you want them to do.
And so let's look to the future a little bit. What are you hearing? What are you seeing in terms of kind of new pressures, new constraints on organizations, and some of the ideas that you feel are best fit, for organizations to be able to navigate this complex, changing environment that we're in?
Well, a few years ago, there was a massive move, and I imagine there still is, to let people work from home, to get rid of the offices altogether, work virtually. And tools like, the Zoom that we're on and those things, they have made that a whole lot better for sure. And there are going to be more and more things that technology will take over through AI, and they will process, and they will do things like that. But somebody I heard recently said, the AI gives you answers. Google gives you answers, right? Those things, you can go anywhere to find answers, but only people come up with the right questions, right? Our humanness of being able to think and not just spot patterns, but to understand intuitively what those patterns might infer, and then think about who would be best to do that, and those things. The humanness of what we do is what needs to be, is going to become the defining factor in the success of a business, because everybody's going to begin to level playing fields with AI and those kind of things. So I think the future of, do people work virtually? It's great for some things, but do they have an ability to actually come together? I used to say, back when the downturn happened in the early 2000s, we were doing a lot of these large sessions for companies, and as soon as the economy went down, there were two types of companies. One called and canceled their all-hand meeting, that they just couldn't afford to do it because it was too bad. The others called and said, no, we have to do it because we can't afford not to. Right? There's that idea that we need to bring our people together to fight this fight, rather than, no, we can't afford to do it. And I think companies in the future are going to have to figure out that balance of, when do we get people face to face? Do we have a process when they come face to face that's going to maximize their time and really get done what we want to have done? And if we have that, then that's going to be a much greater value, and then we can work virtually and we can do those other kind of things. But I think that balance of, if I brought them together, I don't know how to get them all to work together, but I know I need to, and I keep trying to solve it in a virtual kind of way, and you just kind of stay where you are, which is very frustrated and not, creating everything you want to create. I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges going forward to take over.
So you brought up an idea that is probably going to be a more front burner idea, and that is downturn or recession. Mm-hmm. So with all that you've talked about, and you and I have lived through a couple of these, and you've been on the bleeding edge side in technology, and you're still alive, I'm still alive. How would you advise you? So let's say you've been brought in to a company, and they could possibly experience a 20 to 30% market dip over the next 12 months. Mm-hmm. So what are you going to advise based on the lens that you've got?
So two things. One, I'm not going to share a screen, but I'll try to draw on this.
Okay.
This is a friend of mine uses this idea that an individual or an organization, everyone that starts has a dip and then gets really successful, eventually, right, takes a downturn.
Right. Yep, the S curve.
That's right, sigmoid curve. So the thing is, the time to think about reinventing yourself is when you're here, not when you're over here.
Right. That's good.
If you've already started downturning, right, now you don't have the resources, the time, anything to do about it. But if you're making all the money and you're cranking, the whole system says, don't mess with this thing. It's working fine. So it's pushing against you. So the first thing is, don't wait till the recession hits to think about how am I going to work through a recession.
There you go.
That's one. The second one is, one of the things we try to do when we engage with a company is not come in and just do these things for them, but teach them and equip them how to work this way on their own. Because if a recession hits, what is, I can't keep working the way I was. I have to change the way I'm working. I have to work differently, but I can't afford somebody to come in and help me do it. And I don't know how to engage my people in thinking about doing what we do differently to be able to achieve more. But if I've already internalized some way of doing that, now I just crank that up. If I'm an organization that believes in reinvention, and I've been having training people to facilitate or have conversations or think differently and work differently, and we're continually reinventing ourselves, and a recession hits, it's just another form of reinvention. If I'm one that's been all operating by silos and everybody's maxed out on just what they're doing and we're all just working as hard as we can to keep what we're doing, and a recession hits, I'm in big trouble because I can't afford to get help, and I don't know how to do anything different myself.
Right. So you just gut it out and tighten your belt.
And hope it, yeah, start laying people off, and hopefully,
Right.
This too shall pass. But I think, if like I said, I believe the answer's in the room. So if a recession hits, I think there are a lot of people in a company that would have ideas how to save the company themselves. But if you don't have any way to ask them, or if you ask them, you don't have any way to put that into practice, you're in trouble.
So part of what I'm hearing is start thinking about it now, because if there's any signals, you better start now, because when it does hit, it's like an on-off switch. You just won't have time to adjust, to pivot, or anything else.
Well, and back to where we started with this whole idea of open spaces was to enable you to pivot and have conversations and look at yourself and reinvent yourself, right? The intent there is good. If you're able to do that in the good times, to take more market share, to increase sales, to beat your competition, to be innovative moving forward, and a recession hits, you've already got that culture that you're just now applying to new problems.
Right.
If you don't do any of that, if you're just acting like you've always acted, it's going to be a big change. It's hard to change.
So another signal too, if you're growing, but growing at whatever the market rate is growing, then that's probably a false hope, because you're only doing as good as everybody else. And
That's
so
right.
if you're not taking market share away, if you're not growing at that rate, so I think because all the companies I'm working with today are just throwing bodies because there's so much work, but that's market driven. It's not company driven growth. And I think there's a false sense of security when everything looks good and we're growing, but you're still only growing at the market rate.
Well, it's like that old saying about, if you buy a house and it has a really big closet, you're going to buy a whole lot of clothes, right? You're going to fill the closet.
Yes.
And so what happens now is you've got this organization with these big closets, and they can afford to fill it with all these clothes, but they're not thinking about, what are the right clothes I need? What do I really need to wear? How do I organize those? What do I do? If you're not thinking about yourself continually, if you're not thinking about, I know I'm doing great, but how can I do better? How can I be different? Then it's really hard to make that shift, especially when suddenly the pressure's on that you have to shift. Now it's like a double whammy. I don't know how to do it, and I have to, right?
Yeah, you don't have the muscles to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as we kind of close this out, any final thoughts, and what are you doing next, and how do people get a hold of you?
So best way to find me is through our website, wavechanger.com. And by the way, the name came from the idea that, any system wants to stay at homeostasis, right? It wants to stay flat.
Yep.
And so if this is the line of the organization, and you bump it to where you have this amazing experience and everybody says, this is so much better than how we used to do things, as soon as that experience is over, the system will pull it back down where it was. Because that's what systems do. They say this, we believe this is the most efficient and effective way to operate, and anything, even if it's better, is not that way of doing it. I'm going to bring you right back down. So wave change came, go ahead.
That's the old regression to the mean.
Yes. So wave change, the idea is you have to keep bumping the system
Interesting.
to create a wave where you want it to go. And if you're trying to change the system and you create too big a wave, you create a tsunami, it wrecks everything. If you create just a ripple, people ignore it. You got to create just the right wave where to push
Oh, I
it.
love that. I love that
You know?
metaphor. Yeah.
So that's what we hope to do, is help organizations think about, I need to create that wave, and how do I get my own wave for my own culture and my own business to move it where I want it to go.
Great. That's great. Well, Tom, thank you. This is great. Like I said, we will be posting this and making it available. So check out wavechangers.com, and thank you again for the time.
Thanks, appreciate it. Wave Changers, it's actually Wave Changer, just to be clear. And you know, this was a thrill for me. It's so good to be connected to you. If anybody's seeing this, has a space and says, hey, can you come look at it or help us out? I'd love to do whatever I can, because spaces are expensive. You want to use them right.
That's right. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.